welcome everybody. My name is Liam from PCPSI, and I'm so grateful and so delighted to be joined tonight by Deb Dana. Deb, you're very welcome.
I am so delighted to be here with you and with everyone who's listening. Yes.
Great. And I know your passion, Deb, is talking about the polyvagal theory.
Yes, I am a passionate polyvagalist is what I like to say.
And I was thinking today, and I was thinking at the moment, this is my belief, that you're creating a legacy. And I think the legacy that you're creating is that you're taking Stephen's work, Polyvagal Theory, and you're making a bridge between that fantastic theory, and you're making a bridge to what it looks like in clinical practice.
Yeah, that is my that's my intention. So thank you for naming that. Steve's work is really brilliant, and some of your listeners probably had a chance to hear him not too long ago, and in person he lives his theory. He you know, his life is driven by polyvagal and by ventral vagal energy in the world, and so my real desire and my passion has been to take his theory and bring it into everyday user-friendly language, so that not only clinicians, therapists of all kinds can use it, but that curious human beings can begin to understand their nervous systems. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And the good news for us here in Ireland, Deb, is that you've agreed to come and do a training next year.
Yes. I'm looking forward to it.
We've got just so many inquiries already, but just to say that the training is on November the 26th to the 29th of November. It'll be a 4-day training.
Lovely.
So we're very excited, and I know over the next few months I'll be speaking more to you to make out the exact overview, the exact content
Yes.
of that training.
Yeah. It's lovely to have 4 days. It's really a treat. Because we can really understand the, polyvagal in and of itself is a fairly straightforward theory. There are 3 organizing principles, but when you begin to apply those principles, it can become it's less simple,
Exactly.
to do that. So 4 days will be lovely. We will dive into those organizing principles of hierarchy, neuroception, and coregulation, and then we will play around with how do they impact the treatment process, and we'll have a lot of experiential practice in feeling what is it like to bring these to life within a therapist-client dyad. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Great. And so before we kick off, just to say, anybody that have questions, please send them in. There's a chat button available, so any questions, we're very open to hearing questions and look forward to getting questions. So, and you've mentioned something already that's really important, Deb, the 3 organizing principles. Even before we get on to that, Deb, when you meet a client for the first time and you're doing what we might typically call an assessment, what does a polyvagal informed assessment look like?
Yeah. So from the very first moment of meeting, my focus is on the client's nervous system.
Okay.
And I want to hear the story that their nervous system has to tell us, because it's that story that is in fact directing their lives. We think it's the brain story that is directing us, but really the story begins with our autonomic state. So when I meet a client, begin to ask them, what's brought them to treatment. In that very beginning, I get a sense of, is their system dysregulated in a more sympathetic mobilized way or a more dorsal vagal immobilized collapsed way? And I begin in the very beginning by putting this language into my conversation with a client, because the real assessment in the beginning is not what happened to our clients, it's what was their nervous system's response to what happened. That's really what we're going to be working with, not the actual event, but how did your nervous system enact a survival response to that event? And then the story was created from there. Once I've gotten to know my clients a little bit, and they understand we're going to look through the lens of the nervous system as we work, I then let them know that the presenting problem, so to speak, that they've brought to therapy, we're going to put it on the shelf for a little bit. And instead, we're going to work with helping them befriend and begin to regulate their nervous system in new ways. And then once we have that embodied experience, then we can take their problem off the shelf and bring it back in, and we're going to look at it in a bit differently, because their nervous system is going to now support us being able to engage with that problem in a way that offers some options, and we can do something with it. So I'm really always wanting my clients to know that it's not that I don't want to help them with that problem, but my way of helping them with that problem is to regulate their nervous system, because then their internal embodied wisdom will become available to them.
Okay. So that's just to kind of note that that's a really kind of nice way of looking at it. Let's say if a client comes in and they talk about their story, X, Y, or Z happened to me when I was 4. While you're interested in that, you're more interested in how your nervous system responded to X, Y, Z.
Right. So when that terrible thing happened, when that thing that you've really is still alive in you and you've brought here to treatment happened, did you have a sort of a mobilized get me out of here or fight back response? Or did you have more of a begin to disappear, get small, collapse response? And then it goes from there, because then we're beginning to get the flavor of, oh, so your nervous system did this in order to help you survive, right? And then we get to talk about how their nervous system helps them survive then, and is still doing it moment to moment.
Yeah.
And
I think the other really important point that you made is that I would imagine that you teach clients that our nervous system responds without us having any choice.
Right.
And that's a real kind of important.
Yes.
It brings in kind of compassion and empathy then, and kind of can take away shame and blame.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love to tell my clients, it's just your biology. It was your biology being really creative in helping you survive, and you didn't get to choose it. Looking back, you might have said, oh, I wish I had rather done whatever, but that's your brain. And I joke now with my clients. I say, whenever your brain and your body are in an argument, your brain's going to lose that argument. Your body is always going to win. Your nervous system is going to win. So let's not get in a fight with the nervous system. Let's befriend it. Let's get to know it. And then let's see how we might invite it to respond a bit differently, right?
Great.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned these 3 organizing principles: hierarchy, neuroception, and co-regulation.
Yes.
Can you go through them, Deb, please?
Sure. We'll do it quickly, because we're going to spend lots of time really diving in when we're together. But hierarchy is the way our nervous system has been created over the evolutionary span of our species. Not, before we became mammals, we started in a different organism, and we had a dorsal vagal system, and that was the very first system that allowed us to sort of move through the world in a slow way. Dorsal vagal is slow, is deliberate, is steady. It runs our digestion, and in a survival response, it takes us into that collapse, immobilization, disappearing flavor, so that we just aren't quite here anymore. And then the next system to come online, to be built on top of dorsal, was the sympathetic nervous system. And that system works with our heart rhythms and our breath and our motor experience and our temperature control. And then in its survival role, it brings us into that fight or flight experience that we all know, and the cortisol and adrenaline. So then, we had dorsal, we could disappear, sympathetic, we could fight or flight. And then finally, the newest system is the ventral vagal system. And that's the system that allows us to do what we're doing tonight. We can be connected, we can communicate, we can engage with others. And so it's a system of connection. And what I like to remind people is it's a system of connection both to you, to others, but internally to my own system, and to the world around me, and to spirit. And so those 4 connections happen from this newest system, the ventral vagal. And the nice thing about the hierarchy is that we can understand the predictable order. We have an inherent longing, I believe, to be in ventral vagal, in this place of connection. I think our nervous system wants to be there, knows how to get there. When we meet a challenge that is too much for that system, we take a step back, the hierarchy, down into sympathetic, fight, flight. And if that doesn't resolve the challenge, the nervous system takes us into dorsal collapse, right? And then in order to come back to ventral, we have to mobilize a bit through sympathetic and work our way back to connection. Okay. And that the lovely part about that hierarchy is that we can see it happen in our own lives with our clients. And so we know where to go. We know when you're in sympathetic, we know that you can come back to ventral by discharging some of that energy safely. Or when you're in dorsal, you need to bring some energy in to come through sympathetic to come back. So it's a lovely roadmap. The hierarchy is a great roadmap for working with the nervous system. So that's hierarchy neuroception, which is the nervous system's way of taking in cues of safety and danger without our awareness. So in order to really use neuroception, we have to bring perception to neuroception. And neuroception is working all the time in 3 streams. It's working inside my body. It's working outside in the environment, and it's working between. It's listening into the relationship between me and another person. So in that somatic world, in the environmental world, and in the relational world, neuroception is looking for cues of safety and danger. And so that also is a beautiful thing to know as a therapist, because I can send cues of safety to your nervous system and invite you into this ventral vagal connection. And I can also notice, I think I just sent a cue of danger, and we can stop and name it and recognize it, and then begin to get to know what are the particular cues of safety and danger in this relationship. So that's hierarchy neuroception. The last one's co-regulation, which probably should be the first one, but I always put it last. And I know, which is this, we humans, the nervous system is longing to be in connection with another nervous system, always. Co-regulation is a biological imperative. We come into the world, we need another human to be with us and co-regulate with us in order to survive. So co-regulation is an essential ingredient for a life of well-being. And for many of us, it's really a scary thing to do, to co-regulate with another human being. So we become dependent on self-regulation, right? Thinking that I'm independent, I can do this myself, I'll be fine. When in fact, we really need the both and of self and co-regulation. So co-regulation brings the system into that place of well-being that you can't get with simply self-regulation. So yeah.
So 2 things I'm interested in from that, Deb. So the first is the last point. I think again is a really important point. So to have a healthy, balanced nervous system, we need a mixture of self-regulation and co-regulation.
Exactly. Yes.
So, like we could do all the mindfulness in the world.
Right. Exactly.
But we wouldn't have a balanced,
right,
or kind of a healthy nervous.
Exactly. It's, I mean, the things that we do, to nourish our nervous system on our own are wonderful, and they're not enough. We also have to do things with others to nourish our nervous system. Yeah. And in fact, if we think about the developmental trajectory of a baby, moving through childhood into adulthood, we have to co-regulate before we learn to self-regulate. That's the platform. We co-regulate and then we self-regulate. And for many of us, that co-regulation was not predictably there in a safe way. And so we had to self-regulate before we should.
Yeah.
You know, we learn how to do it, but it's a survival response rather than a healthy self-regulating response. And that's the difference. So, yeah.
It's a really important point. And the other point I think was really important, Deb, is this whole idea of noroception. So noroception is our nervous system. It's like a surveilling system, really, isn't it?
Yep, it is.
And it's looking outside of us for safety, for threat, for safety, danger, life threat. It's also looking inside our body, feeling inside our body.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think what you say as well, then it's like between our nervous systems.
Yes. Yes.
And one of the things I was interested in then, and this is from my own kind of life history, is one of the experiences I've often had. Don't get it as much now, but I'd often get a sensation in my stomach, a very deep tightness. It's like my whole stomach was going up under my diaphragm.
Yeah.
So what you're saying then is that when that happens, if that happens 7 times a week or 7 times a day, that my nervous system is picking up on that, and it's taking a message about the world and what's happening from that experience.
Yes, it's beginning to create a story, because that neuroception then gets fed up to your brain, and the brain is our storyteller. So the brain makes up a story to make sense of what neuroception is picking up. So that sense of your stomach tightening and going up under your diaphragm, that information gets fed to your brain, and then your brain makes up a story about the world and about who you are in the world based on that neuroception. Yeah.
And so that I think that leads us nicely into I suppose one of the things you're saying is that kind of unconscious experiences of safety, of danger, of life threat, really, become nearly kind of woven into our personal narratives.
Yes.
And
and then we move through the world, just in this story that our brain has created out of our nervous system state. And so the work, the polyvagal informed work, is really to bring awareness to the autonomic nervous system as the originating point of all of our story, and to go back there and think, what is the state that I'm in right now? And then be able to bring some awareness to that and understand that, so because from a sympathetically driven state, your story is one of danger. And in sympathetic, social engagement goes away. I no longer care about social engagement because I'm feeling the danger. So I sacrifice social engagement for this survival state. And so everybody becomes my enemy, right? In ventral, we can be connected safely. Sympathetic, you become my enemy. And the story is one about me being unsafe in the world, and the world being an unsafe place for me to be. When I move into dorsal, you no longer exist because I've disappeared. And so I'm now floating untethered in space somewhere, and people, I'm not connected. So whereas in sympathetic, you're my enemy, and in dorsal, you simply don't exist. And so you can feel the different stories that come. What we call those emergent properties. So each state has emergent properties. And expecting someone in a sympathetically driven state to have a story of wanting to be in connection doesn't work, because connecting safely is not an emergent property of sympathetic, right? The emergent properties of sympathetic are fight and flight and anxiety and worry and I'm not good enough, or I have to be better than. All of those stories are the emergent properties of sympathetic. And then in dorsal, the emergent properties are ones of collapse, disappear. The world's not safe, so I'm simply not going to be in it. I don't matter. I've been abandoned. Those are the emergent properties. So those are the stories, right? So rather than fighting against the state, rather than trying to get my client to have a new story, I help my client change their state. Because when they come to ventral, the story is one of hope. The story is one of possibility. And then we can work in therapy. Right. But you know, I learned long ago when I took on this way of working that if I'm going to fight with my client's nervous system, I'm going to lose. Right? So I'm not going to fight. I'm going to join with. I'm going to see what the cues of safety are that need to come in so that my client can find their way back to ventral, and then we can work. Yeah.
So, you know, that's really important again, Deb, because I think one of the kind of the real important issues that you're highlighting is the whole idea of attunement. That
yes,
it's really kind of important to be attuned to my own nervous system state
yes,
and the nervous system state of my client. Because if, say, and I know you've often talked about this and you've often told me, and this is, I think, where we join, that our default is to go towards dorsal.
Yep.
So, so if I'm attuning to somebody that their nervous system state is dorsal, attunement really is that I'm not expecting anything from them relationally for a while. But yet the attunement for sympathetic is what they really kind of need is nearly an alliance. They need a kind of a buddy, because they're
right. Yeah. So I love that. And yes, we do, you know, I call it our home away from home. We all have a home away from home, and yours and mine is dorsal. And so, yes, when we meet a client who goes to that dorsal place, we sort of know how to do it because we visit that place in our own system. But, you know, some of the structure of meeting someone in dorsal is to just simply go be with, right? I show up, I am with, I often tell my client, we have all the time in the world, right? Because dragging someone out of dorsal, which is what many therapists are pulled to do because it feels scary down there in dorsal. So we want to get somebody out of there. And you know what I'm inviting people to do is say, no, let's go be with, be in that place with. Let them know I'm here with you. Your nervous system isn't alone anymore. My system's here with you. And we're just going to wait here until your system feels ready to begin to make some movement, right?
Yeah.
That's what we do. And then in sympathetic, you know, you're right. The other is true, that there's so much energy that I need to show up and help my client organize that energy. Right. So yes, I got to join with in a different way, in a more mobilized, energetic way, and let my client know I'm still not telling you have to do anything. You know, but you're not alone. I'm right here with you. And wow, I can feel that energy you have. And let me join with it and feel what that's like. That's the kind of experience with someone in sympathetic, right? Yeah. And then we begin to find our way to ventral, right? And in ventral, I love what you said. I'm glad you said that the first step is I have to be regulated. So the first essential question is, you know, how do I come to ventral and stay there? What does my nervous system need to be in ventral and stay there? And until I can answer that question and be safely anchored in ventral, I can't then offer anything to my client, right? So once I anchor them, I can look to my client and I can say, I'm anchored in my ventral. I am right here for you. You know, how could your nervous system use this ventral anchoring right now, right? And I think, again, it's important for us not to think that polyvagal informed therapy is there's no protocol for it, right? Because, you know, it's not a step 1 to 8 or anything like that. It's you know, in this moment I'm in ventral and I'm offering my ventral regulating energy to you, and how does your nervous system want to connect in this moment? And right now you may want one way, and next week another way may be the way your nervous system is wanting, right? So our job is to be anchored in ventral, offer that regulating energy to our client, and not have an agenda about what's supposed to happen, right? Yeah.
And you're out to saying so much there now. One of the points I just really want to get across is the point around when clients or ourselves are in dorsal, that our job is not to kind of drag people out of dorsal.
Right.
It's really to let the client know that they're not alone.
Yes.
And
yes.
I'm right here with you.
Yes.
I have your back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I talk to their nervous system, because, you know, their prefrontal cortex is not there when they're in dorsal. So I'm not talking to their brain because it's gone away somewhere, but I'm talking to their nervous system. So I use the language the nervous system wants. You know, I'm here with you. My system is connecting to yours. I'm reaching out. Can you feel my energy here with you? It's all this joining language that the nervous system wants. Yeah.
And I'm imagining that it mightn't even be words. It might be our gaze, or kind of our voice, or body language.
Yeah. And proximity. When someone's in dorsal, I often move closer. Because there's a real sense of being alone, being lost in dorsal. And so I often move closer, and just because there is an energetic resonance that happens. There's an energetic signal that gets sent from my ventral. And so I move a little closer. And, you know, you and I were talking about touch before we came on the webinar. I have touch agreements with my clients because I find touch is so helpful. And when you said I have your back, that's actually one of the things I do in dorsal is I put my hand in the middle of my client's back and just let them know, you know, I'm here. And my ventral is reaching out through my hands to you, to your system, because the research shows that that hand in the middle of the back does in fact enliven the ventral vagal system. So I'm using both the science and the social connection to try and help my client feel they're not alone, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So I know it's lovely. It's lovely. I love it when science and our intuition come together, right? You know, yeah. So.
And one of the things that what you've done, and I thank you again for this, Deb. You wrote a book, The Polyvagal Theory and Therapy. And I read the book, and it's an excellent book.
Thank you.
And what I really like about it really explains the polyvagal theory in very simple language, and it explains the bridge that we talked about, what it looks like in clinical practice. And the kind of foundation of the book is about 3 maps.
Yes.
So it's about map 1 is called the autonomic ladder. Map 2 is triggers and glimmers. And map 3 is regulating resources.
Yes.
So again, and we're going to go really into this now in the training.
We are.
Could you maybe just mention briefly, Deb, about the 3 maps? And
sure. Yeah. It's interesting because when I read about Steve's work and then got to know Steve, and I thought, what's the way to make this easily accessible to my clients? And a ladder came to mind because this is a hierarchy. So we're moving down and up this ladder all the time. And I would like to just remind people that the goal is not to be regulated in ventral all the time. Not the goal. The goal is to have a flexible ability to move out of regulation and come back into regulation. That's a measure of resilience, right? It's not that I'm always regulated, it's that I can get back there without getting stuck in a survival response. So the ladder seemed like a easy way because you walk down rungs and up rungs, and so there's this lovely flavor of change that happens. And then we know that when you can notice and name something, that it loses a bit of its dysregulating intensity. So the first ladder answers the question, where am I? And it really helps clients map their 3 states and get to know what happens for them when they are in ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal through their somatic sensations, their thoughts, their feelings, their behaviors. And then once we have that map, that's really the foundational map. Once we have that map, then my question to people often is, well, where are you? Right? And now you can answer that question, and that gives us so much information about what's going on in your system. And then the second map answers the question, how did I get here? Right? So triggers and glimmers says, well, how did I get here? And the triggers are these, we have 2 categories. We have themes or headlines, and then we have the concrete nuts and bolts. So a theme might be a theme of feeling not listened to, right? So that might be a theme that pushes me into sympathetic, but then I have to get really specific about it. I want my client to say, like, not listened to by anybody, by your partner, by your colleagues. We get really specific because when we're specific, then we can work with that concrete cue of danger. The themes are the more general ways the system comes alive in that state. And then some clients will have a concrete cue, like when my husband walks away from me when I'm talking, that puts me into sympathetic. So that you start with the concrete, and then you say, oh, so is that being ignored or being discounted? What you begin to get the theme. So you want both theme and concrete for your triggers. And then the same with glimmers. And glimmers was the word that I came up with to mark those moments when we find ourselves in ventral, right? And so what brings me to ventral? And we want to remember in our work that we're often working with trauma-saturated situations, and yet there are these moments of glimmers of ventral vagal regulation that happen all the time, because the nervous system is very easily able to bring those moments to life. So the glimmers, we want to be both themes and concrete. So for me, a theme for a glimmer for me is the ocean. I live by the ocean, and I can feel it. It brings me to ventral. But then I get concrete. I have a certain beach stone, or I, walk by the ocean, or I drive by the ocean. There are lots of ways I can bring that theme to life. So that's the second map, which really helps us then begin to identify what's going on. How did I get here? And so the third map is, well, how do I get out of here? Or how do I stay in ventral? So how do I get out of dorsal or sympathetic? And then how do I stay for longer moments in ventral? And the third map's divided into those 2 categories of regulating resources: independent regulating, self-regulating, and then co-regulating, interactive regulating. So we get a flavor of, most people are unbalanced in some way, either more self than co or co than self, and it's fine. It's just that we want to bring some balance to the map, so we're always looking to have sort of yes self and co-regulating resources for both. And then the nice thing about the resources map is that you do it and a client has this map and they put it somewhere where they can find it easily. Because when you're in a sympathetic or dorsal state, you can't think about what to do. But you have this map and you just look, you can read and you say, oh, that I can do that. Let's try that. So you've already created the roadmap to get back to ventral. So those 3 maps really make up the basic sequence. And then once we have those, we can begin to really get good at noticing and naming and regulating. And then the rest of the book is really all sorts of ways to shape your system in new ways. But it really is the beginning of the book and those maps that form the foundation of what I like to say is I want my clients to become active operators of their nervous systems. And those 3 maps help us become active operators of our own system. I want to take the mystery out of what's happening in why am I behaving this way? I want to take some of the mystery out of that so that we can say, well, your nervous system state is this. And the trigger to get there was this. And so that's probably why you're here. Now, what can you do to move back to ventral? Yeah.
And it really sounds very empowering.
It is.
Because, when
Is.
you think
Yeah.
of trauma, it's like, one of the experiences of trauma is helplessness.
Right.
And
Right.
I can't do anything.
Right.
So it sounds like, with these 3 maps, one of the things you're saying is that clients can go from, people that experience happens to initiators of their own experience.
Exactly. It's a lovely way to put it. Yes. Yeah. I like to say that you can be the author of your own autonomic story rather than just listening to the story that your system is writing. So yeah, it's about that empowerment, that being able to take some management back. Yeah.
And I think just before we move on, Deb, I think the other thing that I want to kind of highlight again is that what you talked about, the goal of therapy from a polyvagal informed lens. It's not to be in social engagement system safety all the time.
Right.
It's more that each of the systems, social engagement system, sympathetic nervous system, dorsal vagal, that they have a relationship with each other.
Yes.
And they're working well enough.
Right. You just need enough ventral in your system to be able to navigate in a different way. And if we think about it, they're all 3 states are all there all the time, right? And if I have enough ventral in my system, then I can kind of reflect on my sympathetic and dorsal and see what they're doing. But ventral is what leads me through the world so that I can be safe and connect with others and do the things that be organized and do the things that I want to do. But I think we usually have a foreground and a background. And so if in the foreground right now is ventral for me, because I'm really loving, this conversation. And if I look inside for a minute and think in the background, I can find my familiar friend dorsal in the background, right? And that's perfectly fine. Right? As long as that balance between foreground and background stays this way, I'm good to go. Right? And you might find that in your system too. I don't know, but for people listening, to sort of what's in the foreground and then what's in the background, it just gives you a sense of yes, that we are made up of flavors of these energies. Yeah.
And I love your honesty. And I can as well. I'm really, really kind of loving the conversation, and yet I can kind of tune into myself, and I can feel some of them bodily sensations of dorsal, especially in my stomach.
Right.
What I really like is, I think, I don't know, was this your experience? But one of the things that I think from someone that had a lot of dorsal in their system and lived like that for a long time, I think it's very freeing really to talk about our system like this, because I think with dorsal there's always a tendency to pretend that things are different than the way they actually are.
Yes. And with dorsal we can get away with it more than our friends in sympathetic. It's a little hard to pretend something's not what it is when you have all this mobilizing fight flight energy. But in dorsal, I like to say you can go through the motions, but you're not really in here doing it. And so that's kind of the dorsal experience. And I do find as I teach and I do talk about my own system, that so many people say, oh, I love being able to talk about my experience in dorsal. I know, because it's sort of the hidden, state that nobody has talked about.
Yeah, and I think the longer you're in it, the better you can be at pretending.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And the other thing is that when dorsal in that intimate way, and you meet another system, you're with a client who moves into dorsal, there's this wordless conversation that happens between systems, and clients will often, oh, I didn't worry because somehow I knew that you understood where I was. There's this connection that happens, which I think, it's going on all the time anyway. Our nervous systems are having conversations all the time. But there's something reassuring to another system when it meets a system that understands dorsal. It's like, oh, you're not going to make me leave this place because it's too uncomfortable for you, right? Because that's what happens with therapists. We get uncomfortable, and so our pull is to help our client move out of whatever they're in because of our discomfort, right? Yeah.
One of the things I like to say to clients, I like to say to them, you don't have to do anything here that you can't do.
Beautiful. Yeah,
I think
that's lovely.
Captures it.
Yeah, as soon as we have an agenda, we begin to move into some sympathetic, I need to do something energy, right? I have a purpose in ventral. My purpose is to help my client find a way to regulate their system more efficiently, effectively, simply. So, but for me, purpose and agenda are very different. Agenda is more of a, I know how to do this, and I'm going to tell you experience. And purpose is, let's explore this together and figure out what works for your system. So, yeah.
One of the things I'm very interested in, Deb, and we maybe just talk about it in relation to say a client's, their system is under a kind of dorsal dominant. And what we know is that, when I think of dorsal, I think of it like it's like a backlog of processing.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So that's the way I think when I think of my own journey, where I've come from and where I am now. I think there was a backlog of processing. And then one of the things that's become very, I suppose, very kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Very, very valuable now is that when we're working with the nervous system, that less is more.
Yes.
So that again, less is more.
Yes.
So you might just talk about that from a polyvagal perspective, why less is more.
Yeah, I love less is more, and I also love slower is faster, right? Yeah. And again, if we come to look through the eyes of the nervous system, and experience, and I found when I work with my clients now, just, going to dorsal and being there with them in dorsal is a very new experience for clients, because we're used to being there on our own, alone, semi-dissociated, lost, numb, right? So to be in dorsal and have another being there with you, actively just, accompanying you, is often the experience that begins to change how a client's nervous system is organized. Not even talking about anything that happened to them, but simply letting them feel what it's like to not be there alone. Right. And that's that really, for me, a beautiful experience of less is more. I don't need to know the story. I don't need to go back and help you revisit it. I simply am going to allow you to feel what it's like to be there and not be alone. And that's where we start, right? That's where we start. And, I've come to think of ventral vagal, as this unopposable force, is the way I put it. But when my ventral, and I am there with my client and say, I'm here with you in this dorsal experience. And we begin to look around and everything feels just a little bit different, and something happens, and I'm not sure what it is always. And, at the end of a session, a client will often look at me and say, something reorganized inside, right? And it's like, we don't need to know really what one of your traumatic experiences got processed, if we're going to call it that. We don't really care, right? And again, for me, that's the less is more. The less information often yields a huge response, right? I don't need the information. We just are going to let your nervous system have a disconfirming experience, right? Yeah. And then, yeah, I think then we don't need to process everything that happened, right? I'm sure you found that. I know I found that with me. It's like there's, nope, a whole bunch of things just no longer have meaning in the way they did, right? Yeah.
Reminds me of Carl Rogers. And one of the things Carl Rogers said was that if you want to help anybody to move, you have to meet them where they're at first.
Right. I know. If you want to help somebody move, stand still, right? Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and that somehow is so hard for we healers, we professional helpers to do, to slow down and say that my job right now to help is to slow down and just be with. That is the work in this moment. Yeah. Yeah.
I think, and I think it's a conversation for another time, but I think one of the things as kind of healers, as therapists, that doesn't allow us to do that is the whole idea of shame. How shame can be very kind of insidious in the therapy room, and our own shame that we have to do. We have to kind of fix. We have to get someone somewhere. It's really kind of...
Yeah, that is probably a longer conversation, but just to talk for a moment about it, one of the things I love about polyvagal informed therapy is, somebody asked me, I was doing a demo at a training, and they said, well, do you ever have a session that fails? And I said, that's an interesting question. I think I probably would say no, because I'm describing a successful session in a very different way. Right? The successful session is the session when my client and I join together and get to know their nervous system in a new way. Right? So it's kind of hard to fail if, so you're reformatting sort of what your role is as a therapist, right? As long as I can stay in ventral, yes, I would have a failure of a session if I couldn't come and be in ventral. But other than that, we're on a journey together to see what your nervous system needs us to know today and how we can offer it a different, safe, connected experience. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just kind of conscious of the time, and there's a few questions after coming in, Deb. Can you see them on your side, or will
I can't. Yeah. Can you? Yeah.
I can call them out.
Beautiful.
So this is from Julia Hennessy. Hello dear, just wondering what you do when you cannot pinpoint one event or even really know what happened. I suffer from dorsal vagal shutdown.
Great. So we don't need to know what happened, which is, again, the lovely thing about, many trauma modalities, now are telling us that we don't need to know what happened, but especially when we're working with a nervous system, we don't need to know what happened. We only need to know here's the pattern your system has created, and so here's the pattern that we're going to work with to see if we can shape it in a new way. Right. For many of us, who are dorsal, that's our go-to survival response. We may not have an idea of a moment in time when we took that on, and that's fine. We don't need to know that. So, send some encouragement to, is it Julie or Julia? Julie, you do it, and also to, all of us working with clients who don't remember. We don't need to know. We simply are going to help reshape the system, and then there's going to be a new story that appears. Yeah.
Okay, and so next is Lisa. How can we work with polyvagal theory to help women on a journey of healing menstrual problems?
Oh boy, that's a tough one, because you've got a lot of biology going on there, right? I guess what I would say is sort of what I say to answering most clients' questions about, can you help me with fill in the blank, whatever it is, that a regulated nervous system is going to bring more well-being and homeostasis and balance. And so let's regulate the nervous system first. And let's begin to spend more time in ventral and begin to weave a new story about who I am and how I move through the world. And then let's see how that has affected, in this case, menstrual cycle, right? And then let's see what's left. So I, not necessarily with menstrual cycle, but with clients who come who are on a lot of medications. I love it when I have a psychiatrist or a med prescriber I can work with who says, okay, let's see what happens if we regulate the nervous system, and can we titrate off these meds and see what the response is. So again, it's regulate, and then let's see what happens, because part of, whatever the woman's survival response around their menstrual cycle is also creating a story about how they move through the world and who they are. So bringing the ability to look through that through ventral will change that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a really key point, Deb. So regulation, regulation, regulation.
You got it.
Yeah.
You got it. Yep. Regulation, regulation, regulation. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is from Sheena. Sheena, so how does this apply, or rather, how do we work with groups in a polyvagal informed way?
So groups are wonderful, Sheena, to use that 3-map sequence, because if you're working in a group, you've got a whole bunch of nervous systems all trying to find a way to be safely in connection. And so whenever I consult with therapists who are working with groups, I always say, teach the basics of the 3 organizing principles, but have everybody do that first map, the where am I map, the personal profile map. And then you can begin to use that for the group to understand what the flavors are that are in the room. Because if we're all a group and 7 of us are sympathetically charged, 2 have gone to dorsal, and the therapist is hopefully in ventral, then we know what we have in the room, and we can begin to help regulate. And we regulate differently from sympathetic than we do from dorsal. So again, it's really, in groups, it's really helpful for everybody to be able to know, where am I? Which then leads to, what are the cues of safety or danger that got me here? And how do I get out of here? And I would like to talk just for a moment about cues of safety and danger, because it really is a math equation, right? If we have more cues of safety than danger, we can engage and move forward. But as soon as that equation shifts and we have more cues of danger than safety, everything stops. So, whether it's an individual or a group, we need to identify what are the cues of danger that need to be either reduced or resolved, and what are the cues of safety that are missing that we could bring in. Yeah.
So a lot of the therapy work, so Deb, is about building up a critical mass of cues of safety.
Yes, and it's interesting because some cues of safety will remain constant, and then others are going to change over time, right? So again, this is not a static process. This is a living, breathing process that we're in with our clients, and we're just going moment to moment. And again, always being curious about, so what does the nervous system need in this moment?
Yeah.
I always tell my clients, when I ask the question, what does your nervous system need? I'm going to add, in this moment, right? Because that's really the question. In this moment, what does it need? Because 5 minutes from now, it may have a different need that we're going to address. Yeah.
So I think that's an important point, that polyvagal informed therapy is a present moment orientated therapy. Yes,
lovely way to put it. Yes. Yeah, because the nervous system in ventral, we can be in the present moment. We can also be in the future and dream, and we can reflect back on the past safely, but it's the only one we could be in the present. Because in sympathetic, I'm not here in the present, and in dorsal I'm floating, stuck in the past somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Really important. Good. Okay, so the next question, Deb, is from Marie. So hi there. Very interesting. I am just curious about the applications with children and adolescents. Are there any further considerations?
A great question. Thank you for that. And what I have come to say to people is nervous system is nervous system is nervous system. So, and often kids are much more able to connect to their nervous system. They get it. Your map might look different. It might have, faces and colors on it instead of words. If you're working with kids, you often have stuffed animals or objects, and they can pick an animal or an object to begin to represent each of their states, and they can create a story out of that for you. If you work in the sand with sand tray, I often would have my clients build their map in the sand. So it can be a very artistic map with kids. Adolescents really, I've found, love doing these maps because they get to put everything on the map that nobody has wanted to hear, right? It's like, oh, this is me when I'm in this state. And they can just, really describe who they are through these maps. And if you're working with kids or adolescents, you got to remember that their parents need to be doing this work too, because you're creating a new language. And so you want everybody in the family to speak that language, and everybody should have a map, right? It's, parents and kids all should have a map. We should be able to know where we are. And if you're working with kids, it's the adult's nervous system that is the most important, because that's the regulating or dysregulating influence for that kid. Yeah.
Fine. Okay, so I think we have a last question, Deb, from Carol. Hi, Carol here. A client who is traumatized wakes in dorsal state. How are you in relationship to the unconscious states and dream and work?
Oh, dream work is so fascinating, isn't it? And I am nowhere near an expert in dream work, so I'm probably not going to answer that question too well. But I'd talk for a minute about sleep, and it's interesting that she wakes with that sense of dorsal, dread or despair or hopelessness, whatever the flavor is. I would be exploring that with my client. What is the flavor that you wake with, and then how do we gently bring some energy in so that when you wake, you can begin to come through some mobilizing into ventral. And the morning time when clients wake up is a really lovely time to look for a glimmer, because it will then begin to pull their system towards ventral. Because even that client who wakes in dorsal, hopelessness or despair or no energy, her system longs to get to ventral. So we've got to offer it a simple, easy pathway to get there. I probably would, see if there was some music that might be nourishing to her, because it's got to be something easy. You can push a button and the music comes on, or you have an image that is by your bed that you can look at, because dorsal, you have very little energy to be able to use. So you want it to be something that's a passive invitation to come out of dorsal through sympathetic to ventral. And then, we'll figure out what is going on that you're waking in dorsal at some point. But right now I'd like to make it so that when you wake in dorsal, you have a pathway to come to ventral gently.
Okay. Thanks, Deb.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another, just the last. Have you time to take one more question, Deb?
Sure.
Okay, so it's from Julia again. So I teach mindfulness to kids and have come across something called the zones of regulation by a US-based occupational therapist called Leah, I think it's Cupperts, which is being taken up by many schools in UK. The zones, I think, really relate to polyvagal theory. just wondered if you have heard of it. It's a kind of simplified version for kids. Thanks so much for amazing talk.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And, you know, somebody just sent me something on the zones of regulation, and I haven't yet had a chance to really dive in and read it. I will. So maybe by November, I'll be able to answer that question better. But you teach mindfulness to kids, or meditation, whichever it was. You know, it's interesting because with kids, as with adults, we want to make sure that when we're, you know, working with mindfulness or meditating, that we really are in a ventral place and that we haven't gone to a dorsal disappearing, right? Because it's easy to look like I'm being mindful when I'm not really here. So we'll just add that to the list of, if that's why if you have a map and kids are doing mindfulness, well, where are you? Oh, I was gone, you know, whichever zone of dysregulation that is. Yeah.
Okay, listen, we're getting another few questions in, but I think we'll stop because I know we're on the time.
Okay.
We're going to be
We'll
back.
have to do this again.
Oh, we're going to do this next year, Deb, definitely.
Beautiful. I love doing this. So it's a delight to have a conversation with you and then get questions. So let's do it again.
We'll do this. We'll have certainly a few, hopefully
Good.
next year.
That'd be lovely.
That'll be a nice lead into the training.
Yes, I hope to see lots of people in 4 days. We can really form a polyvagal community. That'd be lovely.
That'd be awesome. So again, anybody that's interested, it's November the 26th to the 29th. Hopefully, Deb, you'll come a few days early, or you'll stay a few days. And
absolutely, come enjoy.
We do a bit of touring. We get on
lovely
sites, and
lovely.
You can tell Stephen that you were here. And
I will. I will.
And just to say to everybody, thanks for joining, and you know, we look forward to seeing you again in 2020.
Absolutely.
And you enjoy the rest of the day, Deb?
Yes, I have a rest of a day. You just have a night, right?
Oh, I'm about an hour away from bed.
Okay, well, enjoy a good night's sleep. All right, take care.
Deb, you take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.